Hello boys and gals, welcome to the channel Sophist Speaks, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most famous communist ideologists of all time, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. You may have heard of him as the father of the Bolshevik Revolution and one of the most staunchest followers of Marxism. There is something uniquely Western about romanticizing Lenin. The countries that actually lived under the system his ideas produced tend to not to think of him so fondly. But here, in the comfortable liberal democracies he would have wanted to smash so violently, he is a symbol of rebellion. A man who fought the rich for the rights of the weak and poor. A sort of a brand. You can see him on t-shirts, you can see him on posters. So today we're going to be talking about the man behind the brand. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate the contradictions between his words and his actions, and how badly his ideas stood the test of time. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be mainly focusing on one of his most popular works, State and Revolution, written in 1917, right before the Bolsheviks came to power and Lenin went from a German spy undercover to the voice of the proletariat. Now, I'm not going to sit here and go through every single argument in this book, partly because there's simply not enough time, and partly because most of it crumbles under even the most surface level scrutiny. I want to be clear. This is not a serious academic analysis, and I'm not presenting myself as a Lenin scholar. This is entertainment, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to focus on the parts that, in my opinion, matter the most. The parts that reveal exactly what kind of thinker Lenin was and why the ideas that made him famous were doomed before the ink was dry. As soon as you read the first pages, it becomes abundantly clear that Lenin is very upset. The capitalists, who disregarded Marx while he was alive, took his ideas and stripped them of the revolutionary edge after his death. He feels the need to remind everyone what OG Marxism is all about, and expose the filthy opportunists and bootlickers who refuse to kill thousands of people in the name of revolution. He cites the old master Engels heavily, relying on his analysis of how 19th century capitalist society keeps workers in line. In their view, a state exists purely to serve the interests of those in power. It is a product of irreconcilable class antagonism, a force that stands above society, holds a monopoly on violence, and uses it to silence anyone who challenges it. In Lenin's view, people are entirely defined by the socio-economic conditions they are born into. They have no independent moral agency outside of those conditions. From that, it follows that capitalism is the sole architect of human suffering. It is capitalism that creates those conditions that turn people violent, and that makes them so desperate it forces them into stealing, hurting others, killing people. Remove capitalism, and you remove the conditions that produce that behavior. No capitalism means no crime, therefore no need for prisons, no need for army, because in Lenin's opinion, army exists only to protect the ruling class, the bourgeoisie. So, no ruling class means no need for professional army, prisons, and police. People will arm themselves and handle their own defense. Now, you may wonder, does Lenin ever consider the possibility of an invasion? What happens when a neighboring country with a professional army, trained soldiers, and a worked-out military strategy decides to invade? What exactly are a bunch of people without training, coordination, institutional military knowledge, and any sort of logistics supposed to do? Lenin does not say. He never says, but what he does say is who needs to die. According to Lenin, a soft revolution is not a revolution at all. Voting, debating in parliament, gradual reform, that is not Marxism, that is just child's play. If you want to call yourself a die-hard Marxist, you cannot make a revolution without killing a bunch of elites together with their families, friends, and even employees. What do you mean a child could not exploit the proletariat? He is the son of a wealthy banker. He is as guilty as it gets. And before you think this is an exaggeration, it is not. It is a legitimate conclusion of Lenin's own framework. People are entirely defined by their class position, do you remember? They have no independent moral agency outside of it. The individual disappears into a category, so it doesn't really matter if they did anything wrong. You're a class enemy, and that is enough. The logical culmination of that thinking announced itself on the night of the 16th of July 1918 in some random basement in Yekaterinburg. Tsar Nicholas II, his wife, his 4 daughters, his son, his doctor, his cook, his maid, and even his footman were taken downstairs and shot. The children had sewn jewels into their clothing, which caused the bullets to deflect. And guess what? The executioners simply finished them with bayonets. You could make an argument that Tsar actually had blood on his hands. But what about his wife? What about his cook? What about his children? What did they ever do to deserve such a fate? But within Lenin's framework, the distinction is relevant. They were born into a class that is identified as an enemy, and that was sufficient. Lenin is very clear about what comes immediately after the revolution. The bourgeoisie has been eliminated, the old state has been smashed, and in its place stands the dictatorship of the proletariat, a transitional state controlled by the revolutionary vanguard on behalf of the working class. The transitional state will suppress what remains of the old ruling class, manage the redistribution of resources, and then, once the conditions for classless society are established, it will simply go away. The state will dissolve itself. Power will evaporate. People will govern themselves freely and voluntarily. Lenin obviously offers no mechanism for how that happens. No timeline, no institutional design, no answer to the most obvious question anyone could ask. What happens when the people holding that transitional power decide that they're just not gonna give it up? That they're just gonna keep all the power to themselves? History answered that question before Lenin ever could. The revolutionary vanguard that seized the power in the name of proletariat became a new ruling class almost immediately. Just think about all these dachas, the secret police, the party apparatus. A new elite had simply replaced the old one. The workers who fought for the revolution found themselves in a new system that demanded the same amount of labor and the silence in equal measure, maybe even more. But you don't need to look at what came after Lenin to find the contradiction. You can easily find it in Lenin himself. In 1921, the sailors in one of the cities of Kronstadt, the very sailors who had been celebrated as heroes of the Bolshevik Revolution, staged an uprising demanding the freedoms that the revolution had promised them. Free Soviets, meaning representation, free speech, an end to party dictatorship. And guess what Lenin did? He sent the Red Army and smashed that uprising by killing heroes of the revolution. The dictatorship of the proletariat had met the actual proletariat and opened fire on them. There is no guarantee anywhere in state of revolution that the selected few who represent the workers in the transitional period will not simply become the new royalty. Lenin assumes ideological purity will hold. He assumes that vanguard will just govern in service of the class rather than in service of themselves. He assumes power concentrated enough to destroy one ruling class will voluntarily dissolve once that class is gone. And every single one of those assumptions are baseless. None of them were ever argued. They were simply stated and expected to believe as part of reality. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, Lenin was not a misunderstood idealist whose vision was corrupted by those who came after him. The corruption was there in the blueprint. The violence was not a regrettable side effect, it was the mechanism. The class identity killings, the dissolution of army, the dictatorship that was never going to go away, the workers shot on ice for demanding the rights that the revolution promised them, none of that was a betrayal of Lenin's ideas. It was the manifestation of his ideas in reality. The romanticization persists because the West is comfortable enough to treat revolution as an aesthetic. When the consequences of an ideology are somewhere else and suffered by someone else, it is easy to keep the icon and discard the reality. The people who actually lived inside the Lenin's vision tend not to romanticize it. The man behind the brand believed that your class position determined your guilt, that violence was not a last resort, it was a first principle, that a small group of ideologically pure revolutionaries could concentrate absolute power and then voluntarily give it up. He was wrong about all of it. And a lot of people died finding that out. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm interested in hearing what you got to say about all of this. Leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.